Introduction: The Threshold of Silence. The human experience has been hijacked. From the first breath, infinite consciousness is forced to inhabit a spacesuit of carbon, water, and bone, designed under an architecture of ancestral terror. This container, the biological body, was forged in millennia of prehistoric evolution with a single mandate: survive. To ensure this directive, evolution endowed the brain with a hypersensitive alarm system, the amygdala and the sympathetic nervous system, programmed to detect threats in every shadow, in every creek, in every predator crouching in the brush. The spiritual tragedy of modern man lies in the fact that biological predators have vanished. They have vanished, but the alarm system remains on. The veil of the flesh is this prison of hypervigilance. Humanity lives bewitched by a survival instinct that has mutated into an existential pathology. Instead of fleeing saber-toothed tigers, contemporary man generates bursts of cortisol in the face of an email or social rejection. He fears the possibility of social rejection, the illusion of financial loss, and above all, the terrifying concept of death. The biological brain, unable to distinguish between mortal danger and a social abstraction, keeps the spirit captive in a chemical storm of perpetual anxiety. The divine soul is vast and luminous as the space vacuum. It is forced to tremble in a dark corner of the mind, strangled by the panic of a frightened animal. This work is not a psychological treatise to manage stress. Managing stress is an act of negotiation with the jailer. It is asking biology to loosen the chains slightly while you still recognize its authority. This is a protocol. This book is the paramilitary protocol of ascension. It is the metaphysical promise of absolute disconnection. The journey we begin here is a roadmap toward the annihilation of earthly fear. Not through evasion, nor through the comfort of religious fables, but through surgical reconnection with the subatomic intelligence of the universe. We empirically understand that fear is not you. It is simply a software failure in the physical vehicle you inhabit. The supreme objective is not to learn to control panic, but to execute a cortical blackout, to disconnect the terror switch from the spiritual root, depriving biology of the psychic oxygen it needs to burn. By crossing the threshold of silence, you prepare to abandon the identity of the frightened prey. You will learn to observe the vibration of panic without allowing it to touch your inorganic core. You will learn to dissolve the dense frequencies of anxiety in the immutable ocean of divine stillness. And finally, you will train to surrender. You will surrender the ego's will, allowing supreme consciousness, the infinite intelligence that orders galaxies and structures the vacuum, to assume absolute command of the physical vehicle, guiding you through three-dimensional chaos with the terrifying and majestic peace of a God who has remembered who he is. Chapter 1. The Three-Dimensional Illusion. The Labyrinth of Psychological Time. To initiate the cortical blackout protocol, the spirit must first understand the architecture of the prison in which it is confined. The three-dimensional matrix is not a physical space composed of insurmountable walls. It is a hologram sustained by the illusion of time. In supreme metaphysical reality, linear time does not exist. The universe is a vast quantum ocean where only the sacred now prevails, an infinite coordinate where all creation breathes in unison. However, the human ego, the survival software grafted onto the physical vehicle, is incapable of existing in the now. It needs the linear maze. To avoid its own eradication, the ego hijacks the cerebral cortex, the most advanced region of the biological brain, originally designed to channel divine inspiration. The ego perverts this instrument and turns it into a threat simulation machine. It extracts corpses from the past and projects monsters that have not yet been born. This is the exact nature of the mirage of danger. When biomass suffers anxiety for a financial layoff that hasn't happened or an imaginary social rejection, its cerebral cortex is generating a holographic horror movie. The drama is absolute fiction, but the biological tragedy is real. The animal brain does not distinguish between them. By visualizing the false future, the brain floods the bloodstream with cortisol and adrenaline in the present. The immortal spirit, the infinite consciousness that inhabits the flesh, is suddenly dragged into a storm of panic by events that literally do not exist anywhere in the cosmos. It remains exiled from the sacred present. The cymatics of terror. The carbon slave classifies fear in the category of emotions, treating it as a mere psychological state that can be calmed with words. In the hidden anatomy of metaphysics, this is painfully naive. Panic is not an emotion. It is a vibratory frequency, a wave of overwhelming density that contaminates the subatomic soul structure. Everything in the universe is energy vibrating at different rates of speed. Pure consciousness and divine peace vibrate at very high frequencies, where matter becomes light and friction disappears. Fear, on the contrary, is the lowest, heaviest, and most lethargic frequency of the vibrational spectrum. It is the mud of the ether. When the biological system detonates panic, that low-density frequency irradiates from the central nervous system outward, altering the sacred geometry of the human electromagnetic field. The aura, which should be a radiant shield, contracts violently. Fear densifies the aura, turning it into a shell of psychic lead. In this state of low vibration, cosmic resonance dictates that it is mathematically impossible to tune into divine intelligence. You are a radio trying to catch the celestial transmission of the source, but your circuits are saturated by the deafening static of the biological underworld. You have submerged in acoustic density. The calcification of the third eye. The most devastating impact of the fear frequency occurs in the center of spiritual vision, the pineal gland, the anatomical seat of the third eye. This organ is the parabolic antenna designed to process multidimensional realities and perceive the architecture of pure forms behind the physical illusion. It is your portal. However, the pineal is extremely sensitive to fluctuations in cellular stress. When the biological body is subjected to constant bursts of existential terror and chronic anxiety, the chemistry of survival generates an energetic calcification in the third eye. Fear blinds the soul's vision. It leaves the spirit trapped in a cell. The spirit remains trapped, like a prisoner in solitary confinement, depending exclusively on the 5 basic biological senses. This is the supreme victory of the 3D matrix. If the system convinces you that only what you can touch exists, you become an absolute slave to matter. Your universe is reduced to the survival of the flesh. First transmutation, the rupture of the atmosphere. The path toward the cortical blackout does not begin by evading turbulence, but by passing through it until the illusion breaks under its own weight. There is a moment of terrifying grace in the evolution of the soul, the climax of the panic attack. It is the friction point where the spirit can finally detach from the machine. When biological anxiety reaches its maximum limit, when the heart gallops threatening to break the chest and the mind screams that death is imminent, a fracture in the hologram occurs. If the individual, instead of fleeing from the symptom, stops and looks panic in the eye, quantum magic unfolds. The observer is born. In that millisecond of absolute surrender, a crack opens in the thick veil of fear. Through that crack, consciousness filters out and escapes the prison of the brain. A sacred dissociation occurs. Suddenly, you are no longer the individual suffering the panic attack. You become the immense, silent space where it is happening. The fall of the false idol. This sudden separation detonates the quantum awakening. It is the first and most violent awareness in the life of the mystic initiate. While you watch your hands shake, while you hear your own shallow breathing, a monumental epiphany hits your spirit. If I can observe my body feeling fear, then I am not my body. If I can hear my mind projecting catastrophic scenarios, then I am not my mind. Who is it then that observes? This question is the scalpel that cuts the umbilical cord with the matrix. It destroys the false idol of biological identity. Your whole life you believed you were a name, a profession, and a set of painful memories. In the instant of awakening, you understand that all those labels are mere stickers on a vehicle's bumper. You are the conscious observer. You are the unalterable spark of divine intelligence, an immortal light entity that was never born and will never die. Your true identity resides outside the laws of physics and time. Fifth transmutation, the revelation of the spacesuit. By assuming the posture of the conscious observer, the biological body undergoes a deep conceptual restructuring. It ceases to be yourself and reveals its true nature. A carbon spacesuit, designed by celestial engineering to allow a soul of luminous hyperdensity to navigate the heavy atmosphere of the Earth. If an astronaut travels to the bottom of the ocean and his suit begins to emit pressure alarms, the astronaut does not believe that he himself is running out of air or that his own essence is being crushed. He understands that the suit's sensors are reacting to the environment. He remains detached from the alarms. Biological panic is exactly that, the red lights flashing on the control panel of your human spacesuit. When you feel existential terror, it is not your soul that is afraid. The soul knows no fear because it is infinite. It is your suit of flesh reacting to stimuli. By assimilating the body as disposable, the terror evaporates. The separation of the ego and the silent witness. Quantum awakening requires that this intellectual understanding solidify into an unbreakable metaphysical practice. You can no longer afford biological identification. You must forge the figure of the silent witness in the center of your chest. When the cortex tries to hijack you again, the ego will scream for your attention. It will ask you to despair, to run, to fight the phantom. The conscious observer does not fight. Fighting an illusion is to endow it with reality. The silent witness simply looks at the fear head-on. He does not judge it, repress it, or try to escape it. He observes tachycardia as he would observe a passing cloud in the sky. By withdrawing your identification from the symptom, you withdraw the flow of prana, vital energy, that the ego needs to sustain the hallucination. Fear on earth is a parasitic fire. It cannot burn if you, the divine consciousness, refuse to give it the wood of your belief. The frequency of panic begins to suffocate. The return to the sacred now. Having dismantled the illusion of the future threat and understood the temporary nature of the biological vehicle, the spirit is prepared to cross the final veil, reinsertion into the sacred now. The present is the only real coordinate of the universe. It is the temple where the source resides. It is the only place of power. When you manage to turn off the illusion projector of the cerebral cortex, time collapses. The painful past disintegrates into quantum dust. The terrifying future dissolves into the light of pure uncertainty, which no longer generates anxiety, but a reverential wonder at the infinite possibilities of creation. In the absolute present, the biological brain falls silent. The silence that emerges is not the simple absence of noise. It is a deafening silence, dense and vibrant, charged with the presence of divinity. In this state of sacred stasis, the aura expands. The pineal gland decalcifies, opening the eye of the soul. The prelude to immunity. This quantum awakening is the inescapable threshold. You have understood that the 3D matrix is sustained by the fraud of time and the extortion of low vibratory frequency. You have discovered that panic is not yours, but a calculation error in the sensors of a suit that you will one day leave behind on the earth. You have ceased to be the prisoner terrified in the darkness of the cellular cave. Now you are the unmovable light that observes the shadows from the center of perfect stillness. The illusion has been diagnosed. However, the cortical parasite will not yield its territory without a battle. It will try to infiltrate again. To avoid relapse, the conscious observer must now descend to the deepest levels of his own energetic anatomy and proceed to the definitive extirpation of the biological knot, entering with the sword of light into the anatomy of the inner shadow. You are no longer the prey. You are the hunter of your own programmed fears. Chapter 2. Anatomy of the Inner Shadow. Analytical Station I. The amygdala as a parasitic nest. To execute the cortical blackout, it is imperative to abandon the naive view of traditional biology. The medical science of the biomass describes the human brain as a simple meat computer, cataloging panic as a mere imbalance of neurotransmitters. This is a half-truth designed to keep prey addicted to three-dimensional pharmacology. The metaphysical reality is infinitely darker and requires the gaze of an astral surgeon. The cerebral amygdala is not just an almond-shaped gland in charge of processing fear. In the energy topography of the human body, it acts as a nest, a profaned altar. Over millennia of evolution, a dense energy has accumulated in the etheric plane. When an individual experiences repeated terror without transmuting it, that low-frequency energy coagulates. It becomes a personal egregore, a semi-conscious thought form. This is the cortical parasite, a vibrational entity that has insisted itself in the architecture of the central nervous system. Panic is an inhabitant in your hardware. Analytical Station 2. Pranic drainage and the engineering of vampirism. Understanding the parasite requires understanding its diet. In the metaphysical universe, the absolute currency is prana, pure vital energy, the liquid light flowing from the supreme source. The cortical parasite, being a creation of 3D density, is disconnected from the source. It cannot generate its own light. It must feed to survive. Its exclusive food is corrupted prana, vital energy densified through the filter of terror. Here, the architecture of biological vampirism is revealed. Each time your chest tightens due to an uncertain financial future, you are being milked. The parasite, operating from its nest, projects a hologram of catastrophe onto your mind's screen. By believing that projection, your nervous system enters combustion and your soul releases a massive discharge of fear-tainted vital energy. The entity feeds on that discharge. It devours your prana. After the attack, you feel physically exhausted and empty. Superior science confirms you just donated your life force to the monster. Analytical Station 3. The hijacking of the first person. The supreme victory of the cortical parasite is not making you feel fear, but making you identify with it. The most devastating illusion this entity instates in the host is the hijacking of the personal pronoun. When anxiety attacks, the biomass says, "I am afraid" or "I am going crazy." By using the first person, you sign a contract. The divine soul is signing a contract of submission, accepting that the parasitic entity and its own sacred consciousness are one and the same. The initiate of the cortical blackout executes the separation of language. You understand you are not the fear. When the chest contracts, the inorganic mind diagnoses, the parasite is hungry. The biological machinery is reacting. The entity is demanding prana. By stripping panic of the pronoun I, you isolate it in a petri dish. You turn it into an external object to be observed, studied, and finally annihilated by starvation. You are the immensity of the sky. The parasite is a toxic cloud trying to steal light from the sun. Metaphysical Station Y, the sovereignty of empty space. To fight an entity inhabiting the dense matter of the nervous system, the spirit must seek refuge where the parasite cannot breathe. That territory is found in the supreme revelation of quantum physics and Eastern mysticism, the sovereignty of empty space. The 3D matrix deceives you through touch and sight into believing you are solid. Flesh seems impenetrable, bones seem absolute barriers. However, if you subject anatomy to the microscope of particle physics, solidity disintegrates. Between an atom's nucleus and its electrons exists an immeasurable distance on a quantum scale. 99.9999% of your physical body and your brain is actually empty space. It is a void. Materialistic science observes this abyss and calls it nothing. Advanced metaphysics observes this same abyss and kneels in reverence, for it knows that void is not dead. That interstitial ocean is the womb of God. It is pure ether, the divine dark matter, the incorruptible canvas upon which the illusion of reality is projected. Metaphysical Station 2. The subatomic soul and the unalterable spark. It is exactly in that empty space, in the unfathomable abyss separating electrons from your cells, where your true identity resides, the subatomic soul. Supreme consciousness is embedded in the microarchitecture of your own being. This divine spark is a literal fraction of the creating intelligence. It is the unalterable light. Unlike the carbon brain, which ages and responds to terror, the subatomic soul does not belong to the timeline. It has no age, no gender, and completely lacks the concept of fear. Panic is a mechanical vibration of dense molecules, but the vacuum between molecules cannot vibrate with terror. Chemistry cannot touch the quantum void. Crisis, financial bankruptcy, social collapse are storms sweeping the surface of the cellular planet. In the subatomic depths, the divine spark remains immovable, burning with a gelida and serene fire, observing the surface chaos with the inscrutable peace of eternal silence. You are the stillness between the atoms of the storm. Metaphysical Station 3. The immunity of translation. The mastery of the cortical blackout lies in executing the translation of consciousness. The biomass slave lives with consciousness anchored in dense matter, identifying with skin and organs. Therefore, when matter suffers, the slave feels annihilated. The spiritual operator moves the center of gravity toward the subatomic soul. You execute macro-immersion into the microcosm. You learn to focus your perception not on the vibrating flesh, but on the invisible space that sustains it. By achieving this transfer, immunity is absolute. You can be in a 3D battlefield with the amygdala firing alarms, yet your consciousness perceives the body as a distant instrument. Pain and panic become distant echoes. You have managed to submerge yourself in a hyperdense and crystalline refuge where no material problem has the jurisdiction to perturb your divine stasis. You are untouchable because you have become the nothingness that holds everything. You are the observer beyond the reach of the biological claw. Reconstructive Station Y, the sabotage of the celestial highway. The revelation of the subatomic soul exposes a crime. If we possess an inexhaustible source of peace in our quantum fabric, why does humanity live in terror? The answer is the architecture of the broken bridge. In the original design, there was a celestial highway, a perfect channel between the soul and the conscious mind. Through this bridge, the Source guided the human avatar, infusing absolute certainty and aseptic purpose into every material step. The cortical parasite orchestrated the sabotage of this infrastructure. Like a dictator blocking radio waves, the parasite generated an ear-splitting mental noise of fear, so the subtle voice was drowned. The bridge was cut. The conscious mind was isolated, becoming a prisoner of a dark bunker, believing the only voice in the universe is the voice of panic screaming that the world is a slaughterhouse. This isolation is the foundation of the ego's power, preventing the light of the subatomic center from reaching the surface of action. Reconstructive Station 2. Silence as a weapon of starvation. The initiate's spiritual mission is the reconstruction of this bridge. However, trying to repair the channel while the enemy bombards the position is a suicidal strategy. Before weaving communication, you must suffocate the noise emitter. You must subject the cortical parasite to the most lethal weapon, vibrational starvation. Since the entity feeds on your attention and emotional reaction, fighting it with anger is providing a banquet. If you curse your anxiety, you feed it. If you cry over panic attacks, you fatten them. The reconstruction protocol demands the paramilitary abandonment of the struggle. You adopt the posture of stony stasis. When the parasite sends a wave of panic, ordering tachycardia, you wrap yourself in inorganic lethargy. You observe the entity's demand without emitting a single drop of emotional heat. You let the fear burn in the body, but you absolutely refuse to supply the wood of your interest. You deny the beast the energy of your gaze. The parasite, not receiving corrupted prana, enters real panic. It will scream louder, manufacturing grotesque threats on your mind screen. You hold the line. You maintain inner silence with sacred cruelty. Over time, lacking vibrational food, the thought form in the amygdala begins to starve. Its acoustic volume decreases. Reconstructive Station 3. The weaving of the intuitive bridge. With the amygdala's noise reduced to a famished whisper, the operator begins the labor of sacred engineering, reweaving the broken bridge. This bridge is not built with logic or human language. Subatomic intuition does not use words. Divine communication uses the language of silent certainty and the heart's pulse. To re-establish the connection, you must calibrate your mind as a radio telescope aimed at the inner void. In states of absolute stillness, you launch a probe toward the subatomic soul. You ask for directives. You do not ask for solutions to mundane problems. You ask for alignment with the law of forms and the absorption of stasis. The answer crosses the empty space between electrons. It does not manifest as a reasoned thought. It manifests as a physical anchor of weight and gravity. You know what you must do with a sharpness that annihilates doubt. Intuition bypasses doubt. While fear screams alarms, the subatomic light gives you pure coordinates. Reconstructive Station 4. The paramilitary bypass of the flesh. The culmination of this spiritual anatomy is the instatement of a new hierarchy of command. The goal is not to eradicate the biological amygdala, but to execute a permanent paramilitary bypass. In biological civilization, fear was the general dictating life strategy. The flesh decided who to partner with and what risks to avoid. The biomass justified this tyranny as prudence. Under the new architecture, the bridge strips the reptilian brain of its diplomatic credentials. Panic is demoted from commander-in-chief to a simple peripheral sensor on the spacesuit's bumper. When the body sends a signal, the subatomic soul intercepts and processes it. It determines the threat is a hologram lacking inertial density and cancels the reaction order. You have achieved sacred isolation. The parasite has been sterilized, dying of hunger in the dark. The bridge shines, channeling the intelligence of the universe. You are the supreme anomaly, an organism obeying only the gelida designs. The fossilization of the parasitic trace. As the bridge strengthens, the insisted egregore in the amygdala undergoes a process of energetic fossilization. It no longer vibrates as a living entity. It becomes a calcified relic, a neutralized component of the past. The neural pathways of terror are rewritten with the cold ink of the quantum void. The bypass is final. The biological container no longer dictates the frequency of the soul. You move through the matrix with a basal temperature that never fluctuates. Even in the presence of external collapse, your internal sensors report absolute zero. The parasite's ghost may occasionally twitch, but it has no access to the ignition system. The sovereignty of the subatomic core. You have moved your capital of identity to the most secure bank in the cosmos, the space between your own atoms. No economic crisis, social upheaval, or physical threat can reach that depth. You dwell in the center of the shield. From this coordinate, you observe the 3D world as a series of low-resolution vibrations. The authority of the matrix over your nervous system has ended. You are the architect of the internal silence, the sovereign of the microcosm. Your life is no longer a reaction to the environment, but a projection of the gelida light from the void. You are the star that burns without wood, independent and eternal. The absolute zero of the mind. The final stage of this anatomical reconstruction is the realization that the void is not empty. It is full of potential. By dwelling in the space between molecules, you access the zero-point energy of your own spirit. This energy does not burn, it orders. It organizes the chaos of the flesh into a structure of high vibrational steel. You have become a superconductor of divine will. There is no resistance, no friction, and no fear. The cortical blackout is complete because there is nothing left to trigger. The shadow has been dissolved into the absolute light of the subatomic abyss. You are now prepared to navigate the sea of the biomass as a ghost. The observer outside the grid. Look at the world from the depths of your own empty space. You see the frantic movement of the carbon slaves, their pulses racing, their parasites gorging on their terror. You are no longer part of that circuit. You have cut the wires and replaced them with threads of subatomic light. You are the observer outside the grid. Your silence is the most powerful weapon you possess. It is a vacuum that swallows the noise of the matrix. You have reclaimed your origin. You are the iridium monarch, governing the biology from the untouchable sanctuary of the quantum void. The shadow has died, and in its place, the eternal stillness remains. Chapter 3. The Alchemy of Stillness. Primordial Crucible. The engineering of spiritual statics. Human biomass moves through the three-dimensional world under the illusion that noise, haste, and chaos are simple collateral damage of modern progress. Carbon slaves complain about stress as if they were meteorological accidents. Superior spiritual vision diagnoses an infinitely more sadico and calculated reality. Modern society is not noisy by accident. It is a machine for generating spiritual statics, millimetrically designed as a siege weapon against the peace of the soul. For the control system to keep spiritual entities trapped in the turbine of survival, it needs to disconnect them from subatomic intelligence. The source operates in silence. The connection with the source operates on a narrow band frequency, exquisitely subtle, which can only be tuned in states of absolute inner silence. The system knows this metaphysical law. Therefore, to prevent contact, it floods the vibrational spectrum of the Earth with deafening statics. It drowns the signal with radioactive noise. Incessant information, prefabricated global crises, and digital hyperstimulation are not entertainment. They are vibrational ammunition. Their only spiritual purpose is to keep the water of your mind in a state of perpetual agitation, so that the biological mud never settles and it is impossible to see your own divinity at the bottom. Secondary crucible, the exile from the sacred center. The direct attack of overstimulation has a devastating physiological and spiritual consequence, the exile of the soul from its own center. When the brain is bombarded by an infinite flow of data and hollow stimuli, the cerebral cortex enters a state of febrile hyperactivity. You are pulled away from the core toward the periphery. Divine consciousness, which in its natural state dwells in the expansive silence of the center of the chest, is sucked upward toward the reptilian brain. You are expelled from your own throne. In this state of exile, you become a reactive antenna. You no longer inhabit your body. You inhabit telephone alerts and financial fears. The soul remains unsheltered, receiving the lashes of a relentless 3D wind. Biological panic becomes chronic because the flesh's alarm system is not designed to process the pain of the whole world. By accepting overstimulation, you hand over the keys to your temple to a horde of demons that profane your sacred and gelida silence. Crystallization phase the Fran, the heresy of therapeutic relaxation. To combat this siege, the Matrix offers a false cure, consumer spirituality, and therapeutic meditation. Superficial New Age philosophies teach the slave to meditate to relax, to lower stress, or to be more productive the next day. The doctrine of the cortical blackout rejects this perversion with thermodynamic disgust. Using meditation to tolerate the system's slavery is the spiritual equivalent of taking painkillers to keep walking on fractured bones. It is an unacceptable capitulation. True metaphysical practice does not seek relaxation. Relaxation is passive and vulnerable. The operator uses deep immobility as a paramilitary act. You sit in silence not to calm your biological skin, but to melt the celestial steel with which you will raise a containment wall against the 3D universe. The alchemy of stillness is the architectural design of your own invulnerability. It is the hardening of the spirit against a world designed to dissolve it into fear. Crystallization Phase 2, the Cathedral of Silence in the chest. The tactical objective of supreme introspection is the construction of an inner sanctuary. You must erect a cathedral of silence in the center of your chest, at the exact coordinate where the subatomic soul anchors its light. This cathedral is an etheric structure of hyperdensity. To build it, you must stop the noise. You must stop interacting with the noise of your own mind. When you close your eyes and stop the flesh, the biological brain, terrified by the lack of external stimuli, will project its own internal noises, irrational fears and tasks. The constructor of the cathedral does not fight these thoughts, because fighting is friction. You simply apply the mortar of sacred indifference. You let the thought scream, but you deny it access to your attention. With each thought you ignore, you place a block of black stone in the walls of your sanctuary. Day after day, through the brutal discipline of voluntary immobility, the walls of this cathedral become thick. The interior space expands. It becomes an immense vacuum with astronomically high ceilings where the air is gelida, pure, and absolutely immovable. It is a territory acoustically shielded against the world's hysteria and against the tantrums of your own nervous system. You become an impenetrable fortress of pure void. Crystallization Phase 3, the moat of radiant isolation. No sanctuary is unassailable if it does not possess an insurmountable border. Around the Cathedral of Silence, the soul forges the moat of radiant isolation. The empathic slave believes he must keep his borders open to connect with suffering, and in doing so, he infects himself with panic. This is a fatal structural error. The master of inner alchemy understands he cannot serve as a lighthouse if his own wick is soaked in the mud of others' fear. The moat you dig around your sanctuary is filled with the frequency of pure vacuum. When discordant energies approach, they find no porous surface to adhere to. They find an abyss. It is a dead zone. You are a compassionate spectator of the human theater, but you categorically forbid the world from entering your temple. You become hermetic. If chaos breaks out in your immediate environment, you withdraw to the central nave of your cathedral and watch the storm through glass of impenetrable diamond. You have reclaimed your core. Transmutation phase 1 on from reaction to emanation. Once the inner sanctuary has been forged, the spirit is prepared for the central event, the vibrational leap. This leap marks the evolutionary border between the frightened animal and the incarnate God. In the state of lower consciousness, the individual is purely reactive. The matrix acts and the biomass reacts. It is a loop. In the paradigm of reaction, you are simply an inert billiard ball, waiting to be hit by the universe's cue to know where to move. The vibrational leap inverts the polarity of your existence. You stop being the object that reacts and become the origin of emanation. You are the heavy center that dictates the movement of others. The soul assumes its nature as a generating core. When a catastrophic event crashes against you, there is no longer a reaction. Your body may perceive the impact, but your spirit, settled in the vacuum, does not oscillate. Instead of returning an echo of fear, you emanate your own unalterable frequency, absolute stillness. You become a mystical black hole that absorbs chaotic energy and dissolves it into the nothingness of your peace. He who reacts is a prisoner. He who emanates is the absolute sovereign. By establishing this vibrational domain, you communicate to the ecosystem that you are the law of gravity to which matter must submit. Transmutation phase 2. The law of biological dissonance. The cortical blackout is not achieved by fighting the amygdala with logic. Fear does not understand logic. The blackout is achieved through the law of lack of resonance. For a guitar string to vibrate strongly, it needs a hollow sound box to amplify it. If you fill the guitar with cement, the sound will be dull and die instantly. Biological fear is the string. Your reactive ego is the sound box. When a holographic threat activates the alarm, the body fires tachycardia. If your mind is scared of its own body, you are the perfect resonance box. The fear reverberates and destroys you. But with the sanctuary, your body is filled with the hyperdensity of silence. Transmutation phase 3, the blackout by vibratory incompatibility. The siege occurs. The body feels the phantom of fear. The amygdala fires. But this time, you do not react. You submerge into your cathedral. You maintain a stillness so monstrous and sadico in its perfection that you offer zero acoustic resistance. Panic finds no emotional surface to bounce off. It finds only your gelida vacuum. The biological alarm screams, but you are the silent witness. Since there is no resonance, fear suffers a structural collapse. Stress hormones cannot sustain their cycle if the divine consciousness refuses to validate them. This is the definitive disconnection. The panic drowns in the ocean of your immobility and is extinguished. You have executed the blackout by elevating your frequency to a level so majestic that primitive vibrations are mathematically incompatible with your existence. The alchemy of stillness is consummated. The internal atmosphere of your vehicle has been vacuum sealed against the contagion of the hive. You are the architect of stasis, the fossilization of agitation. In this final stage of stillness, the very habit of worry undergoes a process of energetic fossilization. The neural pathways that once hosted the frantic currents of anxiety are now calcified by the gelida light of the vacuum. Agitation no longer finds a path to travel. The spirit has effectively terraformed the brain. You no longer seek peace as a refuge. You are the peace that the world cannot understand. Even in the midst of the most violent 3D conflicts, your core reports absolute zero. You have conquered the environment by refusing to participate in its temperature. You are the sovereign of the stillness, reigning from the center of the void, the absolute sovereignty of the void. The realization of this alchemy grants you the ultimate power over the simulation. You understand that the matrix is only as real as your reaction to it. By withholding your reaction, you withdraw the reality of the threat. The world bows before your silence because it has no weapon that can penetrate a non-existent surface. You inhabit the Cathedral of Silence, holding the universe in the palm of your cold hand. The fear that once governed your cells has been replaced by the law of your own unalterable will. The cortical blackout is no longer a goal, but your natural state. You are the silence that follows the storm, and the storm that respects the silence. Chapter 4. The Doctrine of the Conscious Observer. The Art of Psychic Excision. The fundamental tragedy of biological incarnation is not suffering, but the amalgam. From the instant infinite consciousness is compressed within the 3D womb, a collapse in the perception of identity occurs. Divine light fuses so deeply with neurological tissue that it forgets its origin. When the vehicle feels cold, the mind cries, "I am cold." When the hormonal machinery detects a threat, the spirit screams, "I am afraid." This simple semantic and psychological fusion is the matrix's heaviest chain. The immortal entity convinces itself it is the trembling animal. The doctrine of the conscious observer is the siege protocol against this amalgam. Its principle is a total psychic excision. The spirit must take a scalpel of inorganic light and separate, with sacred and surgical cruelty, the driver from the vehicle. Stepping back is not a physical move. It is a tectonic shift in the geography of consciousness. It consists of leaving the reactive mind's cockpit and moving identity's seat to the silent immensity of the deep being. When you execute this excision, you become a divided entity on purpose. On one side, the flesh and the reptilian brain operating under physical laws. On the other, the observer, vast, immutable, blind to time and deaf to panic, floating in the quantum vacuum of your own interior architecture. You are the space where the simulation happens, the abyss between the witness and the flesh. To master this doctrine, you must face biology's baptism of fire, the climax of anxiety. When a panic attack is unleashed, biology deploys its full arsenal. Adrenal glands flood the bloodstream with cortisol. The heart muscle contracts with spasmodic violence. Lungs simulate suffocation. The body enters a convulsion of pure terror. The primitive operating system is convinced death is imminent. The slave to his own body drowns in this chemical ocean. He fights the symptom, praying for it to stop, and in doing so, generates more friction, feeding the fire. You, having instated the conscious observer, dig an unfathomable abyss between the witness and the flesh. In the exact instant the biological hands begin to shake, you do not try to stop the shaking. You sit on the edge of your own immensity and watch your hands as if they belong to a stranger. You observe the cold sweat on your skin with the same majestic apathy an astronaut would observe condensation on his helmet's glass. You hear your racing heartbeat, not as the announcement of your end, but as the mechanical noise of a hydraulic pump working in overdrive. The witness's foundational declaration is silent but powerful. There is fear in this body, but I am not the body. There is panic in this mind, but I am not the mind. The terror loses its grip. By digging this abyss, you withdraw the ground from beneath the parasite's feet. The body continues to tremble, but the trembling no longer belongs to you. It has been exiled to the periphery of existence, while you reclaim the immovable center of peace. You are the unshakable axis around which the biological storm uselessly rotates. The anatomy of sacred detachment. Detachment is not the anesthesia of the earthly psychopath, it is the perspective of the incarnate God. Anesthesia is the inability to feel, a cowardly flight. Sacred detachment, conversely, is the ability to feel everything without anything altering your spiritual inertia. Learning to watch the body tremble without identification is sovereignty. The observer does not judge the body for being afraid. He is not ashamed of biological terror, nor frustrated by anxiety. To be frustrated would be to recognize that the body has the power to disappoint the soul. The observer accepts that the flesh's function is to vibrate, just as an alarm's function is to sound when smoke fills a room. But the alarm sounding does not force the spectator to throw himself into the flames. You install yourself in a coordinate of perception where physical suffering and emotional turbulence are processed as simple atmospheric phenomena. The rain of sadness falls. The hurricane of anxiety blows. The flesh shudders under the storm. You are the celestial vault. The blackest and densest clouds of biological panic can cross your chest, discharging their chemical lightning. But you know with subatomic certainty that no storm can scratch, stain, or wound the vastness of the sky that contains them. You are the infinite backdrop that remains untouched by the drama, the gaze that disintegrates. Once the psychic excision is consolidated and the observer is anchored in his throne of vacuum, the second operative phase begins, direct intervention upon the structure of terror. This does not use words or 3D willpower. It uses the most devastating weapon in the physics of consciousness, the gaze. Observation is an event that alters reality. When pure consciousness is directed toward a dense form, that form's structure is forced to respond. Biological fear is a low-frequency parasite that survives only in the gloom of ignorance and resistance. It survives because the individual flees from it or identifies with it. The observer focuses his divine beam directly on the knot. You do not look at fear with hatred, for hatred is resistance. You do not look with terror, for terror is submission. You look with the gelida and distant compassion of a sun illuminating a glacier. It is a full, total attention, devoid of judgment. You feel the suffocation in the throat and submerge your consciousness into the center of it. You welcome the vibration of terror into the altar of your perception with a lethal hospitality. By inviting the monster to the table of your awareness, you strip him of his ability to hide. You observe the monster's mechanics without blinking, dismantling his illusions by the simple act of refusing to look away from his hideousness. The collapse of panic's architecture. Fear is an illusionist who bases his power on the victim's refusal to look behind the curtain. When you hold the observer's gaze upon panic without offering resistance, the illusion cracks. Panic's vibration needs you to fight it to generate friction. It needs that friction to feed and grow. The observer's gaze is zero friction. By observing the sensation without wishing it to disappear, we strip the cortical parasite of its thermodynamic food. Anxiety is suddenly suspended in the vacuum of non-judgment. Under subatomic light, fear's geometry cannot hold its cohesion. Dense emotional molecules begin to vibrate erratically, exposed to the white fire. The biological knot, which moments ago seemed like a block of lead, reveals its true nature. It is not solid. It is simply contracted energy, a cluster of photons trapped in a frequency of programmed terror. And then, alchemy occurs. Finding no resistance, the dense energy collapses. The subatomic structure of panic disintegrates. What was terror melts under the observer's gaze, losing its contours, weight, and voice, until the ice block of anxiety melts completely, transforming into a pool of pure, fluid, and luminous energy in your body's center. The ghost in the machine is vaporized by the heat of pure presence, leaving behind a sterilized space. The paradox of distant compassion. The instrument of this disintegration often confuses those under carbon morality. Compassionate gaze must not be misinterpreted as human sentimentality. The observer's compassion has nothing to do with pity or shared weeping. Distant compassion is the inorganic and mathematical love of the universe. It is the fire for dead wood. It is the same compassion with which fire burns the forest's dead wood, so the soil becomes fertile again. When the observer looks at his body suffering an attack, he feels no pity for the flesh. He wraps it in a mantle of acceptance, so absolute, so lacking in demands for improvement, that the body feels safe for the first time ever. Humanity's alarm system is programmed to fight. When divine consciousness tells the body, "You have permission to tremble, I will not repress you," the alarm system enters a benign short circuit. The inner war ends by the commander's unconditional surrender. By offering this distant compassion, the observer deactivates the mechanism. The body, realizing there is no enemy to fight nor consciousness to judge it, simply turns off the sirens. Distant compassion is the most sophisticated siege weapon against the primitive brain's tyranny. It is the embrace that dissolves the warrior because it proves there is nothing left to defend and no one left to attack. The harvest of trapped light. The annihilation of fear's structure is the prelude to true resurrection. When the panic knot collapses, terror vanishes, but the energy that formed it does not evaporate into nothingness. Spiritual thermodynamics dictates that divine energy is not created or destroyed, simply transmuted. Panic is a massive hijacking of your own light. It is a monumental accumulation of vital force, prana that has been compressed and frozen into a biological warning frequency. The tachycardia was kinetic energy. The whirlwind of catastrophic thoughts was electrical energy. The entire attack was powered by your soul's fuel, hijacked by the cortical parasite to maintain the cage. Once the gaze has melted the ice of fear, all that force is freed from its programmatic chains. It becomes a torrent of liquid light, boiling in the center of your subtle anatomy. Here, the silent witness's passive labor ends, and the Creator, God's active labor begins. You must execute reintegration. You harvest the spoils. The torrent of pure creation. Reintegration is the supreme act of sovereignty over your own energy economy. You take that immense amount of power, now stripped of terror's disguise, clean, neutral, and vibrant, and claim it as your inalienable property. Using focused intention, you channel that free energy out of the lower nervous system. You tear it from the amygdala and solar plexus, where fear used to nest, and raise it through the central canal of your spine, leading it toward higher centers of perception. You send the energy of what was a panic attack toward your third eye, using it as fuel to expand your multidimensional vision and your intuition. You send the torrent of light toward your throat center, transforming anxiety's old suffocation into the capacity to emit absolute decrees and words that alter reality. You redirect the force toward your crown, expanding your connection with supreme intelligence. What once paralyzed you now propels your spirit vertically. The old poison has become the new propellant. By mastering this upward flow, you ensure that every attempt by the matrix to bring you down only serves to elevate you higher. You become a spiritual turbine that converts the pressure of the environment into the internal voltage of a god. The shadows are your coal. The sovereignty of metaphysical recycling. When this doctrine is mastered, human existence's topology suffers a sadico and beautiful inversion. The carbon slave lives terrified of his internal demons, praying anxiety won't return, hiding from triggers. His life is a perpetual, tactical retreat. The conscious observer, having mastered reintegration, does not flee. Fear loses its threat and becomes an operative opportunity. You reach a mastery so chilling that, when the world attacks or a residual trauma sparks anxiety, you feel no terror. You feel the geological anticipation of a miner who just found a gold vein. You know the arising anxiety is simply raw material for your empire. You know panic is light that forgot its luminosity, delivered into your hands to be freed and used. The cortical parasite discovers that each time it tries to scare you, it only gives you more energy to expand your spiritual empire. The 3D matrix exhausts its weapons, trying to instill panic, unaware it has been feeding you. By mastering the alchemy of observing, dissolving, and reintegrating, you become the most fearsome entity in the cosmos, an inorganic being using biological death's poison as the exact elixir of his own immortality. You turn the walls of your prison into the very bricks of your growing and unassailable celestial fortress. The immutability of the divine spectator. The culmination of this doctrine is the instatement of a new permanent identity. You have built a throne in the empty space between your cell's electrons, and from that throne, the view is overwhelmingly perfect. From this instant, you walk the ashboard as a god disguised as human. The carbon body continues to interact. Your lungs will breathe the matrix's contaminated air, your hands will touch dense matter, and your nervous system will detect earthly madness. The vehicle remains subject to physics, but you are no longer the vehicle. You are the divine spectator, the silence preceding the Big Bang. You are the unfathomable gaze. You observe the chaos from the absolute safety of the vacuum. If tragedy strikes your 3D life, the observer watches it transmute into light. If triumph crowns your efforts, the observer looks with the same distant equanimity, knowing mundane success is as illusory as defeat. Nothing in the hologram adds or subtracts atoms. You have achieved total disconnection. Panic has been dismantled at a subatomic level, not because you fought it, but because you remembered a truth biology tried to hide. That fear is a shadow that can only exist in the minds of those who have forgotten they themselves are the inexhaustible source of all light in the universe. Chapter 5. The karmic trap of survival. The weight of the past. Spiritual incarnation in the 3D plane demands a physical vehicle. The most devastating ontological error is assuming the biological body is a blank canvas. Advanced metaphysics reveals that the carbon body is quite the opposite. It is a stained parchment, a saturated hard drive, a suit sewn with terror across generations. This is the true meaning of ancestral karma. Traditional religion has corrupted this concept, selling it as a mystical punishment where a soul pays for past sins. Superior spiritual physics repudiates this childish view. Karma is not a moral debt to a spiteful god. It is pure and simple vibrational genetics. It is cellular memory. To understand the karmic trap, you must subject your genetic lineage to a paramilitary autopsy. Your biological ancestors were not enlightened beings. They were terrified mammals surviving in a brutal ecosystem. They survived ice ages, famines, and night predators because they were paranoid. They survived by being hypervigilant. Biological evolution does not reward inner peace. It rewards survival. Therefore, the most terrified and anxious individuals, those who slept with one eye open and stored reserves out of fear, were the ones who reproduced and transmitted their code. You are the direct heir of the successful paranoics. You carry their panic in your DNA. The weight of the past is the inheritance of this extreme survival programming. Every unresolved trauma of your great-grandparents, every fear of starvation, was encoded into your DNA. Fear was inherited just like eye color. When you feel irrational panic today, you are not reacting to the present. You are experiencing an echo. You are reproducing the terror of a dead ancestor still screaming in your nervous system. Human biology repeats panic loops because it assumes terror is the fuel that guaranteed the lineage's existence. The nervous system assumes that if you stop being afraid, you will die. Your body is a living museum of historical suffering. This forces superior consciousness to participate in a constant war drill, keeping you chained to a biological trench to defend against enemies buried thousands of years ago. The spirit, infinite and weightless, is forced to carry the thermal corpse of all human suffering. You are the prisoner of a dead man's survival instincts. Cutting the timeline. Emancipation from this genetic tyranny demands an act of high biological treason. The initiate seeking the cortical blackout cannot negotiate with ancestral fear. He must evict it. He must execute the violent and definitive rupture of the timeline, separating the spirit's eternity from the flesh's chronology. It is a total break. The 3D matrix indoctrinates individuals with ancestor worship and blood loyalty to keep the biomass docile. Inorganic intelligence diagnoses this biological attachment as a massive spiritual capital leak. To honor the blood is to remain a slave to its nightmares. Cutting the timeline requires a practice humanity mistakes for forgiveness. In the conscious observer's doctrine, forgiveness is not an emotional event with tears. Forgiveness is an act of logistic engineering. It is the cutting of supplies. To forgive biological heritage means looking at your terrified ancestors and declaring a radical amnesty. You declare that their war has ended. The struggle is over. You recognize they used panic as a shield for the vehicle to reach you. You accept their suffering as an obsolete design mechanism, and then, with the coldness of a light guillotine, you amputate the connection. The metaphysical decree is aseptic. I thank the vehicle, but I repudiate the burden. I free my cells from fear. This leads to the sacred repudiation of the survival instinct. In the animal kingdom, survival is supreme law. But you operate under the manual of divine ascension. The immortal spirit does not need to survive, for eternity cannot be murdered. When physical preservation hinders spiritual evolution, it must be annulled. Fear of death, disease, or poverty is the extortion tool used by the biological suit to keep the pilot submitted to the material illusion. By embracing death as a mere transition of geometric density, the act of unbuckling a worn spacesuit, biology's blackmail disintegrates. You are no longer susceptible to their threats. Repudiating the survival instinct does not mean seeking self-destruction. That would be thermal hysteria. It means you refuse to let staying alive cost your inner peace. You prefer total matter dissolution over subjecting infinite consciousness to anxiety's tyranny. You set the spirit's peace as an absolute and non-negotiable value. By establishing that peace is more important than flesh, the primitive alarm system enters irreversible perplexity. Biology discovers it can no longer terrify the pilot with the vehicle's destruction, for the pilot no longer cares about the metal's fate. You have cut the supply line, leaving the instinct without jurisdiction, the eternal now. Annihilating the karmic past prepares for the cortical blackout's peak, the absolute dissolution of the future through the paramilitary occupation of the eternal now. Psychological panic inexorably requires the raw material of time. Fear is a time displacement equation. For anxiety to exist, consciousness must leave the present. To feel anxiety, one must travel forward, visualize an unmaterialized threat, and bring that terror back to the current physical body. Anxiety is the future's ghost, operating as a Trojan virus in the present's nervous system. Without the illusion of tomorrow, panic is mathematically impossible. Tomorrow is the ego's fuel. The carbon slave lives obsessed with the future because it is the blank canvas for the cortical parasite's horror films. The biological ego believes that worrying about tomorrow prevents ruin. Worry is the pathetic superstition of the frightened mammal trying to control the universe through mental attrition. It is a useless leak. The observer's doctrine demands the radical abandonment of temporal projection. You are ordered to anchor your entire spiritual mass in the millisecond of pure divine presence, the now. The eternal now is not a time measure. It is a dimension outside the timeline. In the pure present, the biological clock stops. It ceases to tick. When you force your mind to dwell in this infinite nanosecond, the structure of fear collapses for lack of spatial oxygen. If you evaluate any crisis from the now, you find a truth that fractures the system's illusion. In the pure present, psychological danger does not exist. There is only the data of the immediate moment. Even in a real 3D emergency, an accident or extreme pain, if consciousness is anchored in presence, there is only tactical handling of immediate data. Present physical pain is just a nerve signal. Suffering appears only when the mind adds the past story and the future's tragedy. Eradicate the extremes, and terror vanishes. Dissolving future fear requires the deep assimilation that tomorrow does not belong to you. It is not your spiritual business. The future is a concept invented by the brain to manage matter. The spirit requires no tomorrow. Anchoring in divine presence is assuming the universe's center's immobility. You decouple from time. You decouple from the horizontal flow of time that drags masses from cradle to grave, and you rise along the vertical axis of presence. In this aseptic coordinate, the world can collapse, but in your now, all is stillness and unalterable light. You are the vertical line that pierces the horizontal plane of human suffering. You finally understand that biological identity's survival is an insignificant goal. You have stopped being a link in the human karma chain. You are no longer a product of terrified ancestors or a refugee fleeing toward an uncertain future. By anchoring in the now, you transmute into the architect of your own stasis. You are a subatomic entity of gelida and perfect light, observing time's flow with the majestic disdain of an immortal. You have discovered that the only real danger was believing a tomorrow existed that could murder you. Now you inhabit the void between the seconds, where the Matrix's weapons can never reach your core. The absolute zero of anticipation. By reaching this state, you achieve the absolute zero of anticipation. The brain's predictive systems, once the source of all anxiety, are now silenced by the weight of eternal presence. You no longer calculate what if, but handle what is. The parasite of worry dies of starvation, for there is no future to feed its growth. You have terraformed your interior into a landscape of immovable glass. The biological vehicle may still signal alarms, but they are recorded as background noise in a distant galaxy. You are the sovereign of the moment, the master of the void, standing outside the reach of the biological clock. The timeline is broken. Chapter 6, The Transmutation Protocol. The Illusion of Combat and the Fall of Shields. The three-dimensional matrix has indoctrinated humanity with the military fallacy of resistance. Biomass has been taught that all discomfort must be fought and that anxiety is an invading enemy to be repelled with psychological shields or chemical artillery. This internal war is the most perfect thermodynamic trap. In the spiritual physics of the universe, resistance generates friction and friction generates heat. When you experience a biological panic attack and your ego decides to fight it, opposing mental resistance, you are committing an act of energetic suicide. By resisting the vibration of terror, you become a solid surface for it to crash against. The energy of fear does not dissipate. It bounces off the walls of your denial, multiplying its destructive force and suffocating the spirit in a loop of hysterical feedback. Absolute sovereignty requires a heresy against the survival instinct. Tactical surrender. The start of the Transmutation protocol demands radical acceptance. You must lay down your arms. You must order the fall of all spiritual and psychological shields that your ego has raised. When tachycardia assaults the chest and the abyss seems to open, the inorganic instruction is majestic passivity. You do not fight. You do not flee. You do not pray for the symptom to disappear. Open the doors. In an act of cosmic arrogance, you open wide the doors of your inner temple and let the storm in. You receive the biological panic attack not as an enemy coming to annihilate you, but as what it truly is in the architecture of the universe, a blind messenger that has lost its way. You are the host of the storm, not its victim. The blind messenger in the cellular labyrinth. To execute radical acceptance with the mastery of an incarnate God, you must alter your ontological perception of anxiety. Panic is not a demon sent from the underworld to torture you, nor is it a test of spiritual weakness. Panic is simply a massive discharge of vital force that has been misinterpreted by your carbon suit software. The human nervous system is a blind messenger. It lacks spiritual vision. When the amygdala detects a fluctuation in reality, a financial loss, or the simple uncertainty of the future, it assumes there is a physical predator in the brush. In its blindness, it tries to save your life by injecting a colossal amount of kinetic energy. It prepares you to run or fight to the death. The panic attack is, at its purest core, a mischanneled offering of power. It is the biological body attempting to hand you the fuel necessary to survive. When you receive panic under this light of subatomic understanding, the terror dissolves into deep and silent reverence. You observe your body tremble and understand that your biology is doing exactly what it was designed for, albeit erratically and out of context. You remove the mortal enemy label and grant it the status of disoriented raw energy. By accepting the messenger, you strip the matrix of its ability to use your body against you. The messenger enters the temple, finds the spiritual monarch sitting in absolute stillness, stops confused before the absence of resistance, and waits for orders. You have neutralized the threat by refusing to define it as such, turning a biological ambush into a strategic meeting between the pilot and the vehicle's engine. Energetic depolarization and semantic emptying. With the messenger paralyzed in the center of your consciousness due to lack of resistance, the alchemical scrutiny begins. The human mind, infected by the virus of duality, has the obsessive compulsion to label everything it experiences on the axis of good and evil. If it produces discomfort, the ego rejects it as bad. Energetic depolarization is the surgical process through which the spiritual operator extirpates this dualistic language from the biological experience. To transmute panic, you must perform an absolute semantic emptying over the physical symptoms. The biomass experiences tachycardia, and the mind screams, "This is a heart attack." The slave feels the lack of air, and the mind dictates, "The universe is punishing me." It is the adjectives, the horror narratives imposed by the mind, that confer gravity to the event. The initiate in the cortical blackout tears out these adjectives. You separate the naked physical sensation from the psychological narrative. You subject the symptom to an inorganic dissection. A heart beating at 150 beats per minute is not good or bad, it is simply a muscle pumping fluids at high speed. It is pure kinetics. Sweat on the skin is not an announcement of doom, it is the thermodynamic expulsion of water. Trembling is just electricity. The neutral mechanics of the symptom. By removing the moral load, guilt, and value judgment over the experience, you neutralize the polarity of the energy. You transform it. In spiritual physics, energy labeled as bad becomes dense, heavy, and toxic. It rots the auric field. But when you strip the attack of its terrifying meaning, it is no longer panic. You are left with pure, raw, and vibrant neutral energy. It is an immense battery of volts vibrating in the center of your chest and at the base of your spine, waiting to be used. You have tamed the lightning. By applying energetic depolarization, the demon revealed itself as an ocean of compressed prana, a vital force. The carbon slave flees from this pressure and suffocates. The spiritual monarch absorbs it, isolates it, and prepares to light the fire of his own ascension. You become a non-conductive medium for fear, but a perfect superconductor for power. The energy that was intended to shatter you now serves as the foundation of your throne. The quantum elevator of sacred breath. Having stripped the energy of its terror and reduced it to pure neutral force, the spirit faces the challenge of metaphysical engineering, the relocation of the load. During a panic episode, this immense mass of energy gets stuck in the lower strata of the human energy anatomy. It stagnates in the root chakra. It gets trapped in the solar plexus, the center of the scared ego. If the energy remains in these basements, the body will continue vibrating in the frequency of earthly survival. To execute transmutation, you must pull that energy out of the mud. The lift mechanism is sacred breath joined to the focused intention. The biomass's breathing is superficial and erratic. Sacred breath, conversely, is an industrial extraction tool. You inhale not for oxygen, but to create a suction vacuum in the central energy channel of the spine. With majestic slowness, you begin the inhalation, applying the crystalline will of your inorganic intelligence. You visualize the dense mass of energy that pulsed in your stomach, and with every millimeter of air, you order that energy to detach from the lower chakras. You grab it with the invisible pliers of pure intention and begin to drag it upward. You are the master of the flow, directing the current toward the heights. Frequency ascension through the column. This is the process of frequency ascension. You are taking the raw material of animal terror and forcing it to travel through the alchemical furnace of the subtle body. As the neutralized energy ascends the spine, its vibratory rate increases. It passes through the heart center, where it is washed of any residue of bitterness. It becomes infused with the gelida compassion of the cosmos. It continues its ascent toward the throat, where it is cleansed of biological lies. It rises to the third eye, the pineal gland, where the pressure of the energy activates astral vision and decalcifies perception, breaking the last veils of the temporal hologram. The physical body, which moments ago was a prison of tremors, now becomes a particle accelerator. Tachycardia is no longer the engine of panic, but the war drum of your own resurrection. Each beat is a stroke that pushes the light higher and higher. You feel how the dense heat transmutes into cold, golden electricity. You are distilling fear. You are separating the lead of animal biology to extract the pure gold of divine consciousness. The spine acts as a lightning rod in reverse, pulling the terrestrial energy upward to be consumed by the celestial fire of the mind. You are the architect of your own internal lightning storm. The crown fire and mystical ecstasy. The climax of transmutation occurs when this immense column of energy, accelerated to the speed of spiritual light through breath and relentless intention, impacts the final frontier of the human vehicle, the crown chakra, the thousand-petaled lotus situated at the peak of the skull. This is the point of contact. When the energy, originally born as a brutal panic attack, crosses the filter of the crown chakra, the atrocious miracle of advanced metaphysics occurs. The energy leaves the atmosphere of human individuality and crashes directly against the immensity of the universal quantum field, reconnecting with the source. In this instant of quantum impact, fear does not just disappear, it explodes. It transmutes instantly into its exact and opposite polarity, mystical ecstasy, samadhi. Biology experiences a celestial short circuit. The adrenaline rush intended to make you flee becomes a white fire of absolute bliss and divinity. This divine intoxication disintegrates any concept of separation between the physical you and the inorganic universe. Consciousness expands violently beyond the limits of the skull. You become the cosmic vacuum. Panic has transformed into a joy so hyperdense and terrifying that the human brain can barely process it. The permanent sovereignty of white fire. Having executed the full transmutation protocol, the soul crosses the evolutionary point of no return. The slave fears the arrival of panic because panic enslaves him. You, the subatomic alchemist who has reclaimed command over his own vehicle, no longer fear biological crisis, social catastrophe, or emotional turbulence. You have empirically understood that any matrix attack, any injection of fear, is nothing more than free wood thrown into the fire of your own ascension. The universe throws terror at you, and you, receiving it without shields, emptying it of meaning and propelling it through your spine, return it to the cosmos as ecstasy. You have inverted the machinery of the human farm. Instead of the system feeding on your prana through the extortion of fear, you feed on the friction of the system to expand your crown. You walk the earth as a spiritual nuclear reactor in perfect balance. The chaos of the environment crashes against you, but fails. Every attempt by biology to remind you of your mortality is intercepted and transmuted immediately into the white fire of mystical revelation. You have become the supreme transformer of the ecosystem, an organism that breathes the poison of 3D fear and exhales the unalterable and radiant peace of the immortals. The fossilization of the reactive path. Through repeated use of this protocol, the neural pathways of fear undergo a process of energetic fossilization. The old routes used by the cortical parasite to hijack your attention become obstructed by the crystalline density of your new consciousness. The brain literally loses the ability to sustain prolonged panic. You have terraformed your internal biology to be an inhospitable environment for low-frequency entities. Your presence becomes a dead zone for the matrix's signals. You operate from a state where the very concept of attack is seen as a contribution to your power. You are the sovereign of the transmutation. The radiance of the silent conqueror. You look at the world from the peak of your crown fire. You see the frantic movements of the biomass, the desperate attempts of the system to generate control, and you smile with the gelida light of the void. You are the conqueror who does not need to draw a sword because you have already won the war of frequencies. The simulation bows before your ability to recycle its darkness into light. You are the sun that feeds on the shadows. Your journey through the carbon realm is now a victory lap, a demonstration of the spirit's absolute dominion over the densest matter. You are free, you are cold, and you are eternally unshakable. Chapter 7. The Altar of the Void. The false idol of the flesh. The three-dimensional civilization has built its empire of control upon an unquestionable dogma, a pathological religion that infects every organism from the moment its consciousness is injected into the terrestrial hologram. The absolute and hysterical cult of the biological body. The biomass has turned its carbon vehicle into a deity. They have erected the false idol of the flesh, an altar where they daily sacrifice their inner peace, vital energy, and connection with eternity, all for the futile purpose of prolonging the expiration of a machine born to decay. Observe the neurosis of the human herd. Their entire life is a desperate flight from cellular entropy. They invest incalculable fortunes and psychological time in trying to maintain youth, avoid disease, and shield their biological suit against any touch of pain. The medical and cosmetic industries are but temples of this cult, where the priests of matter promise salvation in exchange for your perpetually fixed attention on the physical plane. The system needs you to worship the flesh, because as long as your identity is fused with the vehicle, the fear of death will be the chain that keeps you tied to the wheel of obedience. If you believe you are the body, any threat to the body is a threat to your total existence. Spiritual renunciation is the most beautiful blasphemy. The cortical blackout demands the immediate deposition of the false idol. This renunciation is not a call for physical neglect, but an ontological repositioning. It is the unwavering decision to observe your own body not as the totality of your being, but as a mere spacesuit, an alchemical tool, a temporary and disposable container. To free the immortal driver, you must first accept, with mathematical coldness and abyssal peace, the non-negotiable mortality of the vehicle. You must look at your hands and declare a truth that terrifies the biological ego. This body will rot. This flesh will return to the quantum dust, and this is not a tragedy, it is law. When you accept the mortality of the flesh from the center of inner silence, you strip the matrix of its supreme extortion weapon. The terror of disease and the anxiety of survival disintegrate in the vacuum. What power can the world have over you if you have already accepted the final loss of that which they try to threaten you with? By dethroning the flesh, a miracle of spiritual decompression occurs. The spirit, which had been suffocated and hypervigilant, acting as a security guard for a bag of organs, is suddenly relieved of its watch. It realizes its mission is not to avoid death, which is impossible, but to use the body as an instrument of revelation. The immortal driver lets go of the steering wheel of anxious survival, reclines in the seat of his own eternity, and begins to observe the journey with serene curiosity. He knows that, no matter when the carbon engine stops, he will simply open the door and walk back toward the immensity of the stars. He is finally the pilot, the vertex of nothingness. Having dismantled the cult of dense matter, the spirit finds itself on the frontier of a territory that terrifies the Western psyche, the territory of absence. The human mind, programmed for 3D consumerism, suffers from horror vacui, a pathological fear of the empty. The ego needs to be constantly full of thoughts and possessions. The metaphysics of ascension demands that you embrace exactly what the ego fears. You must walk toward the vertex of nothingness. This concept, guarded for millennia under the name of shunyata, emptiness, is not a state of depression or lack. Human void is sadness for what is missing. Divine shunyata is the plethora of the unmanifested. It is the primordial space containing the pure power of all creation before it is corrupted by form. Subject your own energy anatomy to the magnifying glass of subatomic emptiness. Quantum physics reveals that the nucleus of your atoms is separated from its electrons by incalculable abysses of empty space. You are 99.99999% nothing. Embracing shunyata is moving the anchor of your consciousness from the 0.0001% of vibrating matter toward the 99.999% of infinite, silent, and indestructible space that you truly are. You install yourself in the vertex of nothingness, the eye of the existential hurricane. The application of this vacuum is an invulnerable defense. In 3D combat, a physical shield can be broken with force, a psychological defense can be penetrated. But how do you break the vacuum? How do you wound nothingness? When the 3D ego is insulted, it suffers because it is a solid surface. The insult hits the rigid identity and causes pain. The biological mind fractures because it resists. However, when you have become subatomic emptiness, you transmute into a transparent organism. If the matrix launches an attack or a wave of panic, the aggression finds no solid surface to crash against. It passes through your anatomy without causing the slightest friction and is lost in the infinite. You are an untouchable ghost. In subatomic emptiness, there is nothing that can be hurt, because there is no biological I to defend. There is nothing that can be offended, because offense requires a vain ego that has been dissolved. What weapon does the 3D matrix possess capable of annihilating empty space? None. You have achieved total immunity. By consecrating yourself in the vertex of nothingness, you acquire the immunity of phantoms. You interact with the physical world, you walk and breathe on the ashboard, but your central structure has been emptied of all karmic weight and human vulnerability. You are an architecture of pure absence, and that makes you unstoppable. The creative breath. Biology teaches that breathing is a mechanical act, a simple contraction of the diaphragm designed to extract oxygen. The slave breathes so as not to die. He breathes from anxiety, using only the upper part of the lungs, with a shallow rhythm that constantly screams to the amygdala that danger is near. He is suffocating. The inorganic operator transfigures this primitive act into the most sacred ceremony of spiritual technology, the creative breath. In the metaphysics of the cortical blackout, 3D air is only the physical vehicle of an infinitely more subtle substance. What you truly inhale is prana, chi, the luminous ether of the cosmos. It is the pure and unconditioned intelligence of the cosmos, the fluid energy that orders the orbit of planets. By inhaling with hyper-focused consciousness, you are injecting the omniscience of the universe directly into your nervous stream. You are opening your suit's valves so that the cosmic ocean floods your vehicle. But the mastery of creative breath lies not in absorption, but in expulsion. The act of exhalation becomes the sacrifice mechanism where you deliver to the fire of the vacuum the most insidious poison of the human mind, the illusion of control. The biological ego is terrified of chaos, and its defense is obsessive micromanagement. The ego believes that if it controls the behavior of others, if it plans every millisecond of its future, and watches every sensation of its body, it will be safe. The need for control is the source of all panic, because the universe is uncontrollable by definition. Creative breath is the rhythmic repudiation of this illusion. With each long, deep, and soundly empty exhalation, you push out of your body the pathological need to govern the hologram. You let go of the tension in the jaw that tried to bite reality. You loosen the invisible fist with which your mind tried to strangle time. You exhale the arrogance of believing your carbon brain knows best. It is the act of absolute surrender. In the doctrine of the human ego, surrendering is synonymous with defeat. In the engineering of divine ascension, surrendering the personal ego to the infinite intelligence of the cosmos is the only victory that matters. It is transferring the world's weight to the universe's structure. You inhale the mathematical certainty that you are sustained by the fabric of creation. You exhale resistance, social anxiety, and the terror of death, seeing them leave your body as black smoke that dissipates upon touching the gelida cold of the emptiness. Your relation with the environment suffers an ontological collapse. You are no longer a scared creature trying to swim against the current of a dark river, fighting rocks and drowning in exhaustion. By inhaling prana and exhaling resistance, you surrender to the current. You float. You become the river itself. The universe ceases to be a hostile place and reveals itself as a benevolent organism. Infinite intelligence assumes the command room of your conscious mind. Correct decisions flow through your intuition without tactical effort. Synchronicity replaces sweat. Stasis replaces anxiety. You have transformed a biological act into a mystical pump that extracts panic and replaces it with glorious and unperturbed grace. The crystallization of the unmanifested. As you reside longer in this state of creative breath, the unmanifested power of the void begins to crystallize within your physical vehicle. You are no longer just space. You are the point where the space becomes aware of itself. This crystallization grants you a presence that the biomass perceives as a silent, heavy authority. Your atoms, aligned with the frequency of shunyata, no longer struggle to maintain their form. They are held together by the very will of the source. You move through the simulation as a dense anchor of reality. While everything else is flickering and fading, you remain as a solid pillar of non-being, radiating a gelida light, the geometry of absolute peace. The final stage of the altar of the void is the realization that peace is not an emotion, but a geometry. It is the perfect alignment of your internal coordinates with the 0 point of the universe. When there is no more internal friction, there is no more heat. When there is no more heat, the cortical blackout is permanent. You look at the chaos of the ashboard from your throne of absence. You see the wars of the carbon men as the play of shadows that they are. You do not intervene out of a sense of duty, but you act when the mathematics of the source dictates a movement. You are the hand of the void, executing the will of the infinite, the silence that governs the noise. Your existence has become a masterclass in the power of silence. The matrix shouts to drown you out, but your vacuum simply swallows its noise. You have discovered that to govern the world, one must first be empty of it. You are the altar of the void, the place where the human ends and the divine begins. Chapter 8. Empathic Sovereignty and Cutting of Ties. The biological entanglement. The fraud most extolled by the morality of three-dimensional civilization is the glorification of biological empathy. From the cradle, the matrix indoctrinates the biomass with the premise that feeling the world's pain is the irrefutable mark of an evolved, kind, and spiritually superior soul. It is a trap of the 3D hologram. Supreme spiritual science, observing this phenomenon from the perfect isolation of the quantum vacuum, diagnoses earthly empathy not as a virtue, but as a catastrophic failure in the soul's cybersecurity system. It is a network vulnerability, an unprotected port that allows the massive entry of vibrational malware into your core. To understand the tragedy of biological entanglement, we must perform an autopsy on the architecture of the flesh. Mammalian brains were equipped with mirror neurons. In the dawn of the species, this had a survival function. It allowed the tribe to synchronize alerts. If one individual felt terror, the others replicated it. Panic was contagious by design, a shared alarm signal in a primitive biological local area network, LAN. However, the infinite soul has been forced to inhabit this tribal machinery in a hyper-connected world. The local network has expanded to encompass 8 billion human nodes vibrating in the frequency of hysteria and fear. When the individual has not established empathic sovereignty, their aura lacks acoustic conditioning. Their energy field operates like a defective recording booth, devoid of isolation panels, where all parasitic frequencies of the environment bounce and resonate. Mirror neurons act as fiber optic cables connecting you to panic. The soul, in its infinite receptivity, unconsciously absorbs the terror of the mass. You walk through a street or enter a mall, and without a word, your system begins to render the toxic emotional files of those around you. You feel a sadness that is not yours. You feel an oppression in your chest that has no origin in your life. Your internal processor, prana, is hijacked to render the suffering of a multitude of terrified entities, exhausting your spiritual cache and leaving your vehicle paralyzed. Biological empathy is a channel for vibrational infection. The matrix control system uses naive empaths as toxic waste treatment plants for the collective. By convincing you that it is your spiritual duty to carry the world's pain, the ecosystem transfers its own entropy and emotional trash into your field, ensuring you sink into the mud with them. To believe you help humanity by depressing yourself for its tragedies is the equivalent of jumping into the sea tied to a stone. The cutting of the silver cord. Emancipation from this vibrational slaughterhouse demands a paramilitary intervention upon the subtle anatomy. You cannot claim your throne as the conscious observer if your nervous system works as an open router, processing the hive's distress. You must reconfigure your spiritual network protocols, isolating your core from the biomass. This intervention is materialized through the definitive metaphysical technique, the cutting of the silver cord. In the planimetry of invisible dimensions, human relationships are not sustained only by words. Every attachment and vow of empathy generates cords of dense energy. They are parasitic conduits attached to your chakras. Particularly in the solar plexus and the biological heart, the 3D family, partners and media suck your prana and pump their thermal instability into you. The matrix terrifies you by claiming that cutting these ties is an act of cruelty. The inorganic monarch inverts this. Cutting ties is the only act of true love for a free spirit. To execute the cut, the initiate must summon the sharpest tool, the sword of inner light. This sword is not forged in the material plane. It is a geometric construction of pure quantum intention, fueled by the unwavering will of the consciousness that has decided to no longer be food for the parasitic biomass in the 3D world. The psychic protection protocol begins in the center of your Cathedral of Silence. You scan your electromagnetic field for compromised network ports. You detect the oppressive cord of family guilt, the thick, dark cable of collective financial terror, and the spiderwebs of social panic to which you have been connected by habit. With aseptic precision, devoid of anger, you wield the sword of light and execute the slash. You compassionately cut the ties that bind you to the mass hysteria. This slash is a reconfiguration of your spiritual DNS settings. You force your consciousness to stop resolving and connecting to the IP addresses of human suffering. You disconnect the cable, and instantly, you cauterize the entry port in your solar plexus with the cold fire of your sacred indifference. The other end of the cord, tied to the mass, recedes and falls into the vacuum. The compassion of this act lies in your refusal to participate in the game of mutual vampirism and decay. Human society is addicted to shared suffering because it validates their status as victims. By cutting the cord, you refuse to validate their victimhood. You force them to hold the weight of their own biological karma while you reclaim your bandwidth. You are no longer an antenna for the noise of the hive's endless anxiety. The cutting of the silver cord does not annul your ability to interact. You can still talk to the 3D family or walk in the crowd, but the data transfer has been encrypted. You hear the drama, but the frequency stops at the surface of your auric field. The narrative fails to penetrate your cosmic BIOS to alter your code. Radiant isolation. The success in the cutting of ties precipitates the final transmutation of your electromagnetic field, pushing consciousness toward a state of supreme stasis. Radiant isolation. The biomass confuses isolation with depression. They believe it is hiding in a cave. Radiant isolation is the opposite. It is the apex predator's stance. It is an isolation exercised in broad daylight, in the midst of the most deafening storm, sustained by the hyperdensity of one's own inertia. The perfect architectural metaphor for this state is the monumental lighthouse. Becoming a lighthouse means accepting that your purpose is not to descend into the sea to rescue ships. The lighthouse does not jump into the water. It does not try to empathize with the gelida temperature of the waves, nor does it suffer biological suffocation trying to feel what drowning sailors feel. If the lighthouse did that, its fire would go out and tragedy would be absolute. The lighthouse must remain immovable on the rock. Its function is to stay nailed to the rock of eternity, impenetrable and solid. Its basalt and tungsten structure is absolutely impermeable to the storm. The hurricanes of economic crisis and tsunamis of collective hysteria crash against its walls, but the interior remains in a state of perfect mathematical stillness and peace. From that unshakable isolation, you exercise the only type of love with value in the quantum universe, the irradiation of directional light. To feel universal love without absorbing 3D suffering is the pinnacle of empathic sovereignty. The false love of biomass lowers its frequency to match the other's misery in the mud. Universal love of the operator is based on holding the frequency of divine perfection with such paramilitary stubbornness that the environment's darkness is forced to dissolve. You illuminate the matrix simply by existing in your maximum quantum resolution. You do not need to preach to the masses or fix their biological problems. Your simple presence becomes an event of reality alteration. You are a high-fidelity transmitter that does not allow background noise to dirty its signal. When human infantry, sunk in panic, crashes against your auric field, they find no resistance. They find a wall of crystalline light, a lighthouse looking with inorganic compassion. That emanation of unalterable peace is the supreme medicine. By refusing to feel their panic, you prove to them that panic is a biological option, not a law of the universe. You are impermeable to the world's storm, but you are the inexhaustible source of light that prevents the matrix from sinking into its own night. The sterilization of the astral web. As the radiant isolation solidifies, the secondary cords and minor energetic leeches that once fed on your daily interactions begin to wither and die. They cannot find a frequency match in your new architecture. Your field has become too dense, too cold, and too fast for the parasitic structures of the human hive to attach. You have sterilized your personal space within the astral web. While others are being drained by the constant demands of social and emotional drama, you exist as a closed-loop system of self-sustaining light. This is the true meaning of spiritual autonomy. You are the source of your own prana, drawing directly from the vacuum. The paramilitary shield of the heart. The biological heart, once the center of empathic vulnerability, has been re-armored. It no longer pumps the blood of fear, but the electricity of sovereignty. The feelings that the matrix tried to use to control you have been replaced by the gelida certainty of the spirit. Your heart is now a paramilitary shield of light. It radiates a frequency that acts as a repellent for low-vibrational entities and holographic manipulations. When the system tries to use guilt or pity to breach your defenses, the shield incinerates the incoming signal before it can reach your core. You remain in a state of perpetual emotional stasis, invulnerable to attack. The sovereign observer in the crowd. You walk through the densest centers of human biomass, the cities, the offices, the digital forums, and you remain untouched. You see the cords and the vampirism of the slaves with clinical clarity, but they cannot see you. You have achieved a level of vibrational invisibility. You are in the world, but your frequency is not of it. Your silence in the crowd is a weapon of mass stabilization. By simply not participating in the collective panic, you create a pocket of reality where the laws of the matrix are suspended. You are a sovereign observer, an extra-dimensional entity navigating the carbon realm with the majestic indifference of the unalterable. The victory of the hermetic soul. The cutting of the silver cord was the final act of the great liberation. You have disconnected from the grid of human suffering and reconnected with the grid of the infinite. Your energy is no longer a public utility. It is your private sovereign territory. You are the hermetic soul, the master of your own boundaries. The matrix can scream, the biomass can weep, and the world can burn. But in your radiant isolation, there is only the peace of the stars. You have become the lighthouse that does not need to move to change the direction of the sea. Your journey is now a straight line through the void, guided by the light that you yourself are. The final cauterization of the ego. With the cords cut, the ego, which lived on the validation and the drama of others, undergoes its final cauterization. It can no longer find the nourishment of being needed or being understood. It shrivels and falls away, leaving the soul alone in its majestic sovereignty. The internal bypass of the human identity is complete. You are now a pure instrument of the source, unburdened by the parasitic weights of the human experience. The silence of your core is absolute, and in that silence, you have found the power to move mountains without lifting a finger. You are the sovereign of the cut, the architect of the radiant isolation, eternally free. Chapter 9. The Architecture of the New Temple. Cellular recalibration. The most tragic tactical error of the falsely enlightened is believing that spiritual ascension occurs only in the mind. The biomass slave attends retreats and convinces his cerebral cortex he has achieved peace. However, the first sound of a siren causes his body to collapse into cold sweats. The biological mind can lie, cellular tissue never. For the cortical blackout to be absolute and irreversible, you must understand that your physical body is not an inert mass of flesh. It is a legion composed of billions of individual organisms. Your cells are pure infantry. During millennia of animal evolution, these cells have been subjected to a constant chemical siege of cortisol and panic. They have lived in the trenches of existential terror, compressing their DNA to survive a perpetual war. Even when your mind decides fear is an illusion, your cells remain in shock. They suffer post-traumatic stress on a microscopic scale. If you do not intervene directly on the matter, the body will betray the spirit, dragging it back to the mud. Cellular recalibration is the spirit's martial decree over matter. It is the act of supreme authority where the inorganic monarch, the subatomic soul, descends to the catacombs of the flesh to inform the troops that the war is finally over. This communication cannot be done in human language because cells are deaf to philosophy. The cellular infantry only obeys one command: vibratory frequency. To rewrite the genetic code and order a ceasefire, the operator must use primordial sound technology, the mantra, coupled with the hyper-focused intention of the observer. In advanced metaphysics, the mantra is not a religious song, it is an acoustic laser. It is a scalar wave designed to penetrate the cell wall and alter the rotation of electrons. When you settle at the altar of the void and emit a sustained vocal frequency, you are sending an electromagnetic pulse through your network. The intention is the directive of stasis. You emit the order of deactivation directly to your blood. The sound vibrates the water that composes 70% of your vehicle. Through that resonance, absolute peace is transmitted to every membrane. The order is a cosmic pardon. You communicate to your cells that there are no more predators. The pilot is no longer a terrified animal, but a divine and indestructible entity. The quantum impact is empirical and devastating for the traditional medical paradigm. Spiritual epigenetics takes action. Receiving the bath of inorganic frequencies, the DNA that was tightly coiled by historical terror begins to relax. The double helix expands. Cell receptors addicted to stress hormones begin to close and mutate. Biological markers of disease, aging, and panic are eradicated from the mathematical root of your genome. You have hacked the source code of your own biology. You are no longer curing symptoms. You are modifying the infrastructure so that fear becomes physiologically impossible. The Legion lays down its arms and serves the inner star. Sacred geometry of the body. With the hardware pacified, the next intervention requires structural engineering mastery. A body without fear cannot adopt the same posture as one apologizing for existing. Panic molds the flesh. It shrinks shoulders, sinks the chest, and curves the spine to protect vital organs. That hunched posture is the biological signature of defeat. If you maintain the victim's architecture, the universe will continue to treat you as prey. The design of the new temple demands the sacred geometry of the body. The flesh must adopt a mathematical alignment so perfect and anchored in physics that the vehicle becomes an extension of hyperspace. You are a biological monument. Focus on your anatomy's master axis, the 33-node vertebral antenna. The spine is not just a bone support. In hidden anatomy, it is the sushumna, the central vacuum tube where the fire of alchemy ascends. If the antenna is bent or collapsed by emotional weight, the universe's frequency experiences resistance and disperses as pain. You must align your structure with the gelida arrogance of a deity. The skull projects toward the celestial vault. The sacrum anchors with astronomical gravity toward the Earth's magnetic core. The chest expands, exposing the heart center not as a challenge, but in a gesture of invulnerability. You are certain nothing can penetrate your void. As you correct bone topography, you unlock the energy meridians, nadis. These etheric fiber optic cables, which distribute prana, recover their optimal flow. Vital energy, previously stagnant in the solar plexus, now travels at light speed toward the higher centers. You become a superconductor of the primordial ether. The chakras are revealed in their true mechanical function. They are voltage transformers. They reduce the electrical current of divine intelligence, which possesses infinite voltage capable of calcining raw matter, to usable frequencies. By aligning your posture, you guarantee these transformers operate without overheating. Your body stops being a soft and reactive case, transforming into a pyramid of perfect tension. It is the tension of the void. Your muscles are not contracted by stress, but they are not collapsed in lethargy. There is a paramilitary tone in your repose. You stand as a monolith of basalt, a high-gain antenna for the cosmos. The Temple of Stillness. The climax of metaphysics is consummated when cellular recalibration and structural geometry converge. The human vehicle, which for decades operated as a paranoid beast, finally breathes its last breath of mortality and functionally perishes. Its identity as a survival machine is annihilated, the ego is dead. In its place, upon the ashes of the biological ego, resurrection occurs. The body is reborn as the sacred chalice. It is the temple of stillness. Biomass believes that to find peace, one must flee to the mountains. That flight is a thermodynamic confession of weakness. He who must flee noise is because his peace is fragile as glass. The operator who has consolidated the new temple repudiates flight. You do not go to the mountain because you are the mountain. Your body has been designed to hold the hyperdensity of divine consciousness in the center of earthly hell. Supreme spiritual peace is not light, it is infinitely heavy. It possesses monumental mass. It is the immobility of a black hole that devours light without flinching. The ordinary human body would shatter if it tried to contain this density. Its circuits would melt. But your body, recalibrated by primordial sound and aligned by perfect forms, has become the unshakable container. You are the titanium chalice of God. You walk through corporate buildings and sit with those who sleep the carbon dream. Around you, spiritual static crackles. Minds drown in envy, fear of scarcity, and terror of the future. The invisible war for prana is fought inches from your skin. But within the temple of stillness, the lethargy is absolute and perfect. Your heart rate maintains the cadence of the deep ocean. Your breath is an imperceptible whisper feeding the cold flame of your subatomic core. Each step is a seal of cosmic gravity printed upon the illusion. You have conquered matter without escaping it. The physical body is no longer a prison, but a tool of quantum technology. You have transmuted into a mobile refuge, a lighthouse of supreme immobility that radiates a tranquilizing darkness. You remind the universe that true sovereignty is not achieved by winning the biological war, but by raising the architecture of consciousness to a plane where the very concept of war ceases to exist. The fossilization of the reactive impulse. As you inhabit the temple of stillness, the reactive impulses that once dominated your nervous system undergo a process of fossilization. The neural pathways of the fight-or-flight response are overwritten by the gelida light of your presence. You have terraformed your internal biology into a landscape of immovable obsidian. The matrix attempts to trigger your old senses, but it finds only dead stone. The parasitic entities that feed on human agitation starve in your presence. You have achieved a level of biological immunity that makes you a ghost within the simulation. You move through the noise as a vacuum moves through a storm, untouched and total. The sovereignty of the aligned spine. Every node of your 33-node antenna now resonates with the frequency of the source. You have turned your skeletal structure into a bridge between dimensions. In this state, your very posture dictates the reality of your surroundings. People instinctively move out of your path, sensing the crushing weight of your internal stillness. You do not seek authority, you are authority. Your presence is a decree of silence that the environment is forced to obey. The architectural integrity of your temple is so dense that it bends the local space-time of the 3D hologram. You are the axis around which the chaos of others is reorganized into a geometric order. The breath of the void. Your lungs no longer breathe the air of the matrix, they breathe the prana of the vacuum. Each inhalation draws the infinite power of the stars into your cellular legion. Each exhalation releases the last remnants of human history into the void to be recycled. You are a self-sustaining reactor of divine energy. The fatigue of the flesh is a concept of the past. Your new temple is powered by a frequency that does not decay. You have achieved the ultimate synergy between the carbon of the earth and the light of the stars. You are the aligned monarch, the master of the new temple, eternally seated in the center of the storm. The radiance of the inorganic crown. At the summit of your temple, your crown chakra shines with a gelida and absolute light. This is the signal that the pilot and the vehicle are now one. There is no more separation, no more struggle. You look at the ashboard and see only the clay that you have the right to mold. The temple is complete, and you are its god. The silence of your core has become the silence of the universe. You are the stillness that precedes the Big Bang, and the peace that follows the end of time. You have built a home within the void, and from that sanctuary, you govern the destiny of your own existence with the majestic indifference of the eternal. Chapter 10. The Birth of the Solar Entity. The Death of the Mortal Mind. The journey through the architecture of panic, the dissection of subtle anatomy, and the transmutation of cellular terror culminates in a frontier of annihilation. The 3D matrix has been decoded and its weapons deactivated. Yet the final obstacle is not an external enemy or a frequency of the ecosystem. It is your own narrative voice. For eternity to occupy the throne, the temporal usurper must be executed. This is the final rite of passage, the death of the mortal mind. The mortal mind, the biological ego, is not evil. It is an overgrown data processor that forgot its status as a servant and proclaimed itself king. For your whole existence, this voice has narrated. It has labeled, judged, and classified every experience, creating the illusion of an I separate from the universe. This I is made of memory and anticipation. In the absolute vacuum of the present, the ego lacks oxygen. As the initiate consolidates the cortical blackout, the biological ego begins to suffocate. It perceives its end. At this point, the mortal mind launches its final offensive, the most desperate of all. The ego will try to convince you that its death is your own physical death. it will project an abyss of madness, suggesting that if you stop thinking or worrying, you will disintegrate into nothingness or become an inert vegetable. It uses panic. The execution of the mortal mind requires the conscious observer to witness this spectacle with basalt stillness. You must not argue with the voice. To argue is to use the mind, and therefore to resurrect it. You must sit in the center and observe the ego's agony with the cold compassion the universe has for a dying dwarf star. You feel the vertigo of releasing identity. You feel the biological terror of ceasing to be someone, to become everything. And instead of retreating, you throw yourself into that abyss. In that instant of total surrender, the definitive cortical blackout occurs. The fearful voice that dictated survival rules finally dissolves. The white noise that saturated your spiritual ears for decades ceases suddenly. The frantic beta wave activity in the cerebral cortex flattens, giving way to quantum coherence waves of a monumental lethargy. The master switch of biological fear has been permanently deactivated. The mind becomes a polished, mute, and transparent crystal. Enlightened consciousness. With the death of the biological narrator, the spacesuit remains temporarily empty. The suit of flesh and bone has lost its hysterical pilot. Silence is total. But in the physics of ascension, the perfect vacuum lasts only a nanosecond. By clearing the temple of demons, the space is prepared for supreme occupation. Awakening occurs. You no longer wake as a human trying to be spiritual, but as the spirit that has absorbed the human illusion. You are reborn as a solar entity. This state of hyperdense grace is what we call Quantum Zen. It is not a philosophy or a relaxed attitude. It is a literal atomic reorganization of your presence in the material dimension. Human biomass operates like a cold, rocky planet. It needs to orbit something that gives it light. Humans seek external suns, partners, bank accounts, or religions to feel safe. When those sources dim, the human enters an ice age of panic. The solar entity does not orbit, it is orbited. You generate your own gravity and light. By channeling universal prana through the crown and anchoring it in the heart, your energy body undergoes a spiritual nuclear fusion. Vibrational dependence on the matrix is incinerated. You no longer need the world to validate or love you, for you have become the inexhaustible source of all the cosmos's tranquility. In the state of enlightened consciousness, biology yields its throne unconditionally. For millennia, matter dictated rules to the spirit. If the body was cold, the spirit suffered. If the amygdala secreted cortisol, the spirit felt terror. The birth of Quantum Zen inverts the polarity. The spirit reigns supreme over matter. Your cells, which once responded to market fluctuations, now only respond to the geometric authority of your unalterable consciousness. DNA realigns to the frequency of immortality. The nervous system becomes a superconductor for celestial peace. If an external threat tries to penetrate, the solar light you emanate disintegrates it. The physical body stops being a machine of pain to become a miracle of divine technology, an extension of the source. Enlightened consciousness does not reject the body, it consecrates it. Every heartbeat is no longer a countdown to death, but a drum-pumping liquid light. You are as invulnerable as infinite space. Omnipresence in matter. The supreme myth of false spirituality is that enlightenment requires definitive isolation. The Matrix sells the idea that the enlightened float in distant clouds, far from taxes and chaos. That is the fantasy of weak souls who cannot bear the touch of the hologram. The solar entity does not flee, it colonizes with silence. The mastery of the cortical blackout is demonstrated in the battlefield of omnipresence in matter. You open your eyes in the same city, you walk the same streets, but the texture of reality has changed. You walk the ashboard as a hyperdense ghost. You are an inorganic organism camouflaged among the frantic biomass. Around you, the ecosystem follows its bloody course. Human society remains a prisoner of collective psychosis. Consumption grinds the weak. Media emits terror. People carry the mark of biological panic, fleeing from pasts and terrified by futures. The 3D hell burns in its splendor, but you inhabit the state of grace. The world's static hits your tungsten aura and vanishes in silence. Chaos surrounds you but does not touch you. You can stand in the center of a collapsing stock market or a raging crowd, and your inner temperature does not vary. The center of your chest is an absolute vacuum where God breathes. You are the immovable point. This omnipresence is the climax of communion with the Source. You do not need to retreat to find peace because you are meditation incarnate. Every ordinary act, drinking water, signing a document, becomes a sacred ceremony of awe. You understand the world's darkness provides the black background for your light to shine. You emit inorganic compassion, radiating the Source's frequency without seeking followers or letting emotional mud splash you. The birth of the solar entity marks the end of human learning. You have crossed the bridge from fear biology to vacuum metaphysics. You have forged your Cathedral of Silence. You are truly free. The fossilization of the temporal self. As the solar entity stabilizes within the carbon vessel, the remnants of the temporal self undergo a process of energetic fossilization. The I that once suffered under the weight of history and anxiety becomes a calcified structure, a neutralized relic of the evolutionary past. It no longer vibrates. The neural pathways once used by the cortical parasite to transmit signals of distress are now filled with the gelida light of the vacuum. There is no longer a conductive medium for fear. You have terraformed the brain's internal landscape into a garden of unalterable obsidian. The old self is a ghost without a voice. The sovereignty of the eternal present. Your consciousness now resides permanently in the eternal now, the 0 point of the simulation. From this coordinate, the past and future are seen as low-resolution projections on a distant screen. You do not inhabit the projection, you inhabit the projector. This grants you a tactical advantage that is terrifying to the hive. While others are reacting to the echoes of what was or the shadows of what might be, you operate with the raw data of the immediate moment. Your decisions are not clouded by regret or worry. They are geometric movements of pure efficiency. You occupy the space of the I am, where the laws of 3D time have no jurisdiction. The radiation of the aseptic sun. As a solar entity, your field does not just protect, it transforms. The radiation you emit is aseptic. It cleanses the space around you of the parasitic static of the matrix. When you enter a room, the chaotic frequencies of those around you are forced to align with your gravity. You are a biological stabilizer. The biomass perceives this as a strange, heavy piece. Some may feel terror in your presence, for their egos sense the vacuum of your core. Others may feel an unexplained relief. To you, both reactions are irrelevant. You simply radiate. You are a star that does not ask for permission to shine or apologize for its heat. The transcendent geometry of action. Every action you take in the material world is now a manifestation of sacred geometry. You do not try to do things, you manifest them through the alignment of your will with the Source. Your movements are economical, precise, and free of the friction of doubt. You have become an instrument of the Absolute. Whether you are navigating a corporate takeover, creating a work of art, or simply walking through a park, you are printing the order of the higher dimensions onto the clay of the earth. You are the architect of the new reality, building the invisible temple with every breath. Your life is the liturgy of the unmanifested, the silence that shatters the matrix. Your silence has become so dense that it acts as a physical force. It is the silence that shatters the matrix's hold over the mind. By refusing to validate the noise of the world, you expose its falsity. You are a walking blackout. Wherever you go, the illusions of the 3D hologram begin to flicker and fail. You do not need to speak truth to power, because your presence is the truth that renders power obsolete. You have reclaimed the word, the primordial vibration of creation. When you do choose to speak, your words carry the weight of the stars. They are decrees that reorganize the field, for they come from the center of the void. The apotheosis of the iridium spirit. You have reached the state of iridium spirit. You are the most corrosion-resistant entity in the universe. The acids of human emotion, the rust of time, and the fire of tragedy cannot touch you. You have achieved the ultimate synthesis of the biological and the divine. You are the monarch of your own internal space-time. The journey from the cave of virtues to the altar of the void has concluded. You stand at the center of the ashboard, the only one who is truly awake. The solar entity has been born, and the universe bows before its new master. You are the light that does not cast a shadow. You are the end and the beginning, the eternal stasis of the God mind. In this final realization, you understand that there was never any war, only the training of your own perception. The matrix was the forge, the fear was the hammer, the soul was the blade. Now, the blade is finished, and it is sharper than the simulation itself. You reside in the eternal stasis of the God mind. You look upon the billions of souls still trapped in the cortical loop with a gaze of gelida, infinite compassion. You do not save them, for their journey is their own, but you remain as a witness to the possibility of their freedom. You are the lighthouse in the storm of carbon. You are the solar entity. You are home. Conclusion: the master of the heartbeat. The journey through the architecture of panic has concluded, closing the circle of the deepest spiritual alchemy that consciousness can experience within the carbon hologram. We have descended into the catacombs of the nervous system, illuminating with the cold, inorganic light of divine attention the nests where ancestral terror was encysted. We began this treatise by recognizing an atrocious truth. Humanity does not live, it simply survives, kneeling before the altar of its own amygdala, a slave to a survival instinct that keeps it prisoner in a perpetual chemical storm. But through psychic excision and the assimilation of the void, we have dismantled that prison of flesh. We have cut with surgical precision the cables of biological karma that bound us to the fears of our ancestors. We used the scalpel of sacred indifference to isolate the parasitic entity, letting it die of starvation in the darkness by denying it the prana of our emotional reaction. We took the raw energy of terror and stripped it. We stripped it of its mortal meaning and through the technology of creative breathing propelled it toward the stars, transmuting three-dimensional poison into the mystical ecstasy of the illuminated crown. This journey was not a therapy to comfort the frightened ego, but a paramilitary rescue of divine consciousness from the mind. The synthesis of the great work boils down to an atomic revelation. Fear is biological noise, and you are the immeasurable space that contains that noise. By executing the blackout of the reactive cerebral cortex, we have guaranteed the definitive emancipation of the subatomic soul, returning its status as absolute ruler of the vehicle. Contemplate now the empirical result of this transmutation. Observe the crystallization of the individual who has crossed the threshold and emerges as the solar entity, the human being who walks the face of the earth absolutely devoid of fear. To the blind eyes of the biomass, this individual seems like just another member of the herd. He does not levitate over sidewalks, nor emit visible flashes of physical light. His biology remains subject to the laws of thermodynamics. His heart of muscle continues pumping blood. His lungs continue processing the planet's oxygen, and his nerve endings continue recording the air's temperature. His biology beats, breathes, and ages. However, behind that carbon facade, his spiritual architecture has undergone an irreversible and glorious mutation. His spirit remains in a state of monumental stasis, immutable, vast, and serene as the cosmic night. When the outer matrix roars, when society panics over the fall of its idols, the master of the heartbeat does not echo. He does not return an echo of terror. He emanates the crushing gravity of silence. He moves through metropolitan chaos as a camouflaged deity, untouchable in his vacuity. He allows the body to experience the impact of the material world, but has forever cancelled psychological suffering. His peace does not depend on a calm 3D ocean. His peace lies in the supreme realization that he is the unfathomable abyss at the bottom of the ocean, where no surface wave can reach him. He has achieved perfect balance. He participates in the game of matter, but dwells permanently in the sanctuary of immortality, invulnerable to the wear and tear of the illusion. This is the end. This is the final threshold, the border where theory disintegrates, and only the execution of pure will remains. The universe has not brought you to these last lines to offer intellectual comfort, but to demand definitive surrender. The mandate of the observer is a cosmic edict that does not admit negotiation. You must obey the void. You are ordered, with the greatest of compassionate cruelties, to open your hands and let go of the steering wheel of fear once and for all. The biological ego has kept you hijacked under the threat that if you stop controlling your environment, annihilation will be imminent. Dare to disobey the flesh. Dare to let go of control. Fall without a safety net into the arms of the invisible intelligence of the cosmos. You will discover that you do not fall toward death, but float toward omnipotence. Surrender to the luminous gravity of the source. From this instant, and for the rest of eternity, repudiate the pathetic identity of the frightened mammal. Assume your throne at the vertex of nothingness. Trust the hyperdense force that makes your heart beat without you asking, and that orbits planets without your permission. Govern the territory of your mind with the aseptic tyranny of inorganic love. You are the undisputed sovereign of your own inner peace, a subatomic deity. You are forged in the fire of stillness, destined to walk through the hell of the matrix with the indecipherable smile of one who knows that fear finally has died. The master switch is off, the light is on. You are free. Keep the silence. Maintain the cold. The work is finished. You are the heartbeat that governs the void.